All right. For our next lesson in U.S. wars, we're going to be going over the Bolshevik Revolution and the exit of Russia from World War One. Pretty huge event. I'll try to explain it as simply as I can. There's a lot that goes into this. I highly suggest looking more up yourself if you're interested. So simply put, by the time we get to the years 1916 to 1917, the war is going pretty badly for Russia. Yes, they had some headway, I guess you could say, or some success against the Ottomans, but they didn't have enough to put into it. Again, we talked about that in the last video, or 2 videos ago, how they just didn't have enough supplies to push forward. But against Germany and Austria, things are not going so great. Germany has actually been able to push Russia back quite far into Russian territory at this point by 1916, 1917. And the Russians have launched a few offensives that were just disastrous. Notably one called if I remember right, I think the Kerensky offensive. I might be getting that a little bit wrong at this moment. So basically a lot of people die. And nobody's happy. As it says there, with the war going badly, many Russians saw an opportunity to overthrow Tsar Nicholas II. That's a lot, and they all didn't agree with each other, so you have a lot of differing factions all fighting against each other. And at the same time, because Russia's had a lot of how do I put this, communication with Britain and France and exposure to the lifestyles and government styles of Britain and France, the more progressive democratic governments, ideas like women's suffrage and stuff like that, start bleeding into Russia itself. And a lot of people are thinking, we want a new government. Why are we an old monarchy still? Why do we let the Tsar basically just pick us up and put us on the front lines and destroy our families and kill our fathers and our brothers off? So a lot of people are pretty ticked off, and they think if we're going to continue this war, we want to have more of a say. So without going too much more into that, essentially you have this very pro-democratic ideas coming up within the populace, but even more importantly, you have some very, very extremist thought processes on the socialist side, with guys that are leaning more towards, they want a violent overthrow of the government, and they want to set up a new government that's for everybody, essentially a new socialistic or communistic government, which we'll get to in a little bit. So everything comes to a head in the beginning of the year 1917, and this is the start of what's called, if I can bring it up, the Russian Revolution. And the revolution has 2 parts. The first part is a part that, when we look at it all by itself, especially from, say, a more Western point of view, like America, Britain, France, like, hey, it seems like an overall good thing. Just simply put, through a bunch of demonstrations and in many cases how the army just doesn't want to go along with the Tsar anymore either, especially through the efforts of women's marches for women's suffrage, the Tsarist regime goes bye-bye. Now, this isn't the idea where it was violent. It actually wasn't. There were some fights, but it wasn't a massive upheaval revolution with hundreds of thousands or millions dead. You had a couple fights in the streets. You had a couple examples of suppression. But when Tsar Nicholas saw that things were not going his way, instead of fighting for his power, looking back in history, he steps down for the good of his country. He's like, all right, if I'm a roadblock to Russia, I'll step down. So he voluntarily resigns as Tsar and allows a new democratic government to take over. So this new democratic government, though, makes a bit of a mistake. Well, historically speaking, it's a mistake. We today look back on it as a mistake, and one of the main reasons why people are so upset was the destruction that the war has brought. And one of the things the new democratic government decides to do is remain in the war, feeling that they had a duty to do so, that they needed to make sure that Russia helped win this war. At the time that seemed like the thing that was needed to do. This made a lot of people angry and pushed a lot more people into the camp of some of the more extremists, like the Bolsheviks. And so after they have the failed, I shouldn't say failed, but an offensive that goes, maybe this was the Kerensky offensive, and I'm thinking of the other offensive. Anyways, the Russians have quite a few disastrous offensives. They have an offensive, that an attack against the Germans and the Austrians on the Eastern Front that just doesn't go very well in the summer of 1917, giving more fuel to the fire that people are like, we're just done with this. We want to be out. This new Democratic Party is just a shill. The Tsar is telling them what to do behind our backs. This isn't a new government at all. And so with that thought process in line, a guy like Vladimir Lenin, who we'll talk more about on the next slide, is able to get his very extreme, radical group of Bolsheviks, official name Social Democratic Labor Party, to run their own coup. And this is a bit more of a violent coup. They attack and take over government buildings all over Moscow and Petrograd. Petrograd, by the way, St. Petersburg today. Was renamed Leningrad, by the way, after this coup. Coup, by the way, is a word that means overthrow a government. And when they get this to work, which they do, they firmly set in place a communist government, which is the official start of what we know as the Soviet Union today, or USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. So, moving on. The two guys in charge of the Bolshevik Party, well, number one is Lenin and his comrade in arms, a guy named Leon Trotsky. Okay, these guys, Trotsky especially, had some pretty, I don't know how else to put this, scary ideas. Trotsky, for one, felt like there was a definite need, in order to get a perfect utopian society, socialist communistic society, where everybody is equal, you have to get rid of anybody that just won't accept that. And he saw that as being around like 30 to 40% of the population need to be wiped out. And when I say 30-40% of the population, yes, he saw that within Russia, but we're talking about the world here. He actually saw this as a way to unite the world in one world communist government, and that most likely 30 to 40% of the world would have to die and essentially be gotten rid of. Mostly the middle class and upper classes of the world societies would be gotten rid of in order to get this utopia. Again, however you want to look at that, some people today still like that idea, and a more mainstream idea, that is dang scary. So, but these two are the ones that ignite this, or start off this new government and get it going to where they are the first, how do I put this, the first major power in world history to try communism, and an idea that's been around for decades, but they're the first ones actually to enact it and try it. Now, the very first thing they do, though, is they realize we need to follow through with their promises. They promise to get out of the war, and they do. And so they have a meeting with the Germans to discuss, okay, what are we going to do? And if you're looking at this map here, hopefully you're seeing my pointer. So here's the battle line at the point where when the revolution happens, the Russian Revolution happens. This is how far Germany and the Central Powers have pushed the Russians back. Now, that's quite a bit further than where they initially started over here. Oh, whoops, sorry. But when they signed the treaty, Lenin just gives them tons of land. I mean, look at all of this. He just cedes over that wide swath of land. It's almost like the German ambassador was sitting like, sure, we would like to have this. And the Bolsheviks or Lenin's like, sure, you can have that. And the Germans like, can we have a little bit more? Can we have Crimea? I really wouldn't say the Germans are saying, can we? They pretty much says, you need to give us this. You know, the way negotiations go. And pretty much just Lenin just gave them almost everything they wanted. And the Germans are pretty happy about that. I mean, if the Germans would have won World War I, Germany would have been a lot bigger. Austria, the Hungarian Empire might still be around today. There are a lot of reasons why they still might not, but they'd both be a lot bigger, especially Germany. But the reason why Lenin was so willing to give up so much land just to get out of the war as soon as possible was that he saw this as a temporary thing. He and Trotsky both thought that this isn't just going to be a Russian thing. Yes, we're going to start this in Russia, this new communistic style of life, but we're going to spread this to the rest of the world. So the reason why they give up so much land is they're just thinking, you know what, pretty soon we're going to have that land back anyways, and we're not going to do it through war, we're going to do it through revolutions in your own countries. We're going to topple you, we're going to get you. You know, in a way, Lenin and the Bolsheviks that are meeting with the Germans, well, Lenin himself didn't go, by the way, but the guy he sent that's meeting with the Germans are just kind of laughing under their breath the entire time, thinking, we're going to get you later. You might think you're getting a lot now, but we're going to get you later. So, but Russia pulls out of the war officially. But right now I'm going to jump really quickly into something. I'm not going to spend tons of time on it. But soon after they pull out of the war in 1917, 1918, or end of 1917 and the beginning of 1918, a lot of people in Russia realize, we don't like this. This isn't what we thought life would be like. We thought that when we overthrew the government, our lives would get better. And for a lot of people, it's getting worse. One of the biggest groups of people that life was getting worse for were the farmers. The farmers were very on board with the overthrow of the government in the first place, but when they actually saw how communism was being implemented by the Bolsheviks, who were more focused on the industrial side of things within the cities, they're like, we want out of this. So all these people that hate each other all kind of realize that we don't like communism, so they join together in what's called the white side, or the White Army, and you get a huge civil war that starts. This civil war goes on for a while. Millions die. It's understandable why, like, in the first couple decades of Russian, in the 20th century, in the 1900s, basically in 1900 through 1950, basically until the death of Stalin, 1953 I think it is, tens of millions of Russians die, whether it's through World War I, the Russian Civil War, the purges, the genocides, especially through Stalin against his own people, World War II. Yeah, it's understandable why maybe you don't see too many smiling pictures of Russians throughout, especially the first part of the 1900s. And this is no different here. Basically, you get the two sides that go at each other. The Red Army is essentially the Bolshevistic, communistic side. The White Army is just everybody else that doesn't want it. And they don't necessarily like each other as well. I mean, look at that. You have the idea of aristocrats, or kind of the wealthy nobles, teaming up with farmers. That they're not big fans of each other. And the White Army does go down. The Red Army is able to win. And three main reasons why the Red Army is able to win. First off, they have control of the industrial sectors. They have control of the weapons manufacturing. Next off, Leon Trotsky, actually. Even though he was a big-time philosopher and politician, he turned out to also be an incredibly good military tactician. Mostly on the side of supplies, but he did very good at leading the Red Army. And then last off, nobody from the outside got involved. In fact, Britain, France, the United States wanted the White Army to win, but they had just finished World War I. Like 1918 is the end of World War I, and that's when the Russian Civil War is just getting going. And they had this idea that no one wants to get involved in a war, so they all stay behind. They give tentative support to the White Army, but not enough. Definitely not open support. They stay back, and since this remains just a Russian Civil War, it just stays that, a Russian Civil War. This will come into play a lot more when we start talking about Russia leading into World War II. But at this point, that's the basic idea here is that Russia pulls out of the war, turns communist. You have the beginning of the Soviet Union, and this will become a major player. These guys will become major players going into World War II. But I'll end the video at this point.